Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah daf tet, Moadim l'simcha. We're now going to get started from the bottom of Chet Amud Bet. We started a braita. The Mishna had talked about how midah keneged midah, measure for measure, people get punished based on what their punishment was. So we started with saying, how do we know this? We brought three psukim. The first one was b'sas'ah b'shachat riveno, that God will send you out to be destroyed according to the measure, but that was a big measure of a se'ah. Then they said, how do we know a smaller measure? And then we brought this pasuk, kikol se'on, which sounds like a small se'ah. So'en berash will be punished, this noise, with the appropriate punishment. And then we said, how do we know that things join together, small amounts, until they get to something big? Now we brought a pasuk from Kohelet, one by one, right? It will eventually make a bigger amount. Then we started saying that we see this example by Sotah, as our Mishna had said as well, although this gives a much, much longer list, and we're now in the middle of that list. We saw, I believe, two of them yesterday. Now we're going to see a whole bunch more. She made up her face look beautiful. Therefore, her face turns green. One of the things that the Mishna describes in Daf Kaf, that is going to happen to her as part of the process. She put makeup on her eyes. Therefore, her eyes bulge out. That's another description in that Mishnah. She braided her hair for this man. Therefore, the Kohen unties her hair, as we saw, right? Part of the process, he undoes her hair, right? He takes off her hair covering and undoes her braids. She sits, different explanations, but let's do the one. She said, come here with your finger to the man she was attracting. Therefore, her fingernails fall off. This, by the way, does not come up in a description in the Mishnah like the others. We don't have a description, but our braita clearly has this as one of the things that happens to her. She put on a very pretty belt. Therefore, he takes this rope, this Egyptian rope, and ties it around her breast to make sure her clothes don't fall down. This we saw on the previous page. She opened her legs. Therefore, her legs fall. She took him on her lap. Therefore, her stomach explodes. She fed him delicacies of the world. Therefore, her sacrifice is a disgusting one. She brings it with barley flour, which is considered very low-level food. She fed him wine, and beautiful, great wine in beautiful cups. Therefore, the Kohen makes her drink this bitter water in a very ugly cup. Earthenware vessel is usually not a very pretty cup. She did it secretly. We're going to now see two possibilities as to what her midah keneged midah, or measure for measure, is. Yoshev b'seiter elyon, because she sits in secret. The one who sits in his hidden chair, sam b'panim, he personally delivers the punishment. Shneimar v'ayin noef shamra neshev, an eye that wants to sin waits for twilight, lemor lo teshuveno ayin, because she thinks no one will see her. So here we see, right, she did this secretly, and God, the one who abodes in secret, he came out of his abode and punished her personally, which is because he makes her stomach explode, right? It's all God's hand about whether this goes this way or that way. A different explanation. She tried to be secret about it. God made this very public. His hatred will be sealed with deceit, and then his evil will be revealed to all. Okay, that's the end of the braita. Now the Gemara wants to ask about these three verses we had at the beginning. Since we already learned it from 1 + 1, right, is all going to add up to a bigger cheshbon, then obviously small things count because they'll add up. So why do you need the other pasuk? Which they say lechamida, because that one teaches you the sa'on so'en is exactly the way you did it. That's what you're going to get punished by, right? The measure for measure. Whereas you don't get that from echad echad, they add up, but that doesn't mean you're going to be punished measure for measure. But now they say, we started off big in the braita, and then it said, what about small options? So now they say, well, if you know you get punished by small things, measure for measure, obviously you're going to get punished for big things, measure for measure. Logical. So what do you need that pasuk? So in the end, they're going to say that pasuk actually teaches something different. You need that pasuk, and then it seems like they're changing the braita. Don't use that pasuk at all. They use it for the chiddush Rav Chinin Abar Papa. As Rav Chinin Abar Papa said, Rav Chinin Abar Papa, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu nifra min ha'umah ad sha'at shilucha. God wants to punish other nations. He waits until it's time to completely destroy them, that they've sinned so badly that they're ready for complete and utter destruction. Shene'amar b'sasa b'shalcha tirivena. Like God picks the fight with them when it's l'shalcha, to completely wipe them out. And b'sasa, right, in this huge measure. Ini, is that really true? But ha'amam rava shlosha kosot amrot b'mitzrayim lama. If you remember with Moshe, not Moshe, Yosef, here's the dream of the butler with the wine. So he basically describes, and in it, the word kos appears 3 times, the cup. So they learn from here that it's a reference to 3 cups of Mitzrayim, that they're going to basically, cup of punishment, that the puranut, the bad thing is going to come on them 3 times. What are these 3 times? Moshe. First one, during the time of Moshe, that was the Exodus. This is when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed them in the time of the first destruction. They also got destroyed and wiped out by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. And one for the future, when all our enemies are wiped out. So now what do you see here? God doesn't wait to wipe them out entirely. They were destroyed 3 different times. If you want to suggest, these are different Egyptians. Those were one kind. They got wiped out. A different nation came in that lived in Egypt. They were called Mitzrim, and that was the one Nebuchadnezzar wiped out. They got wiped out entirely, and a third one came along. And they're not really the same Egyptians. But that can't be true. Because Vahatanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, there's a braita that says, Rabbi Yehuda said, Minyamin ger Mitzri, ayali chaver mitamidei Rabbi Akiva. I had a friend, Minyamin. He was an Egyptian convert. Now the Torah says, Egyptian converts can't marry first generation. A Jew can't marry a first generation Egyptian convert. Can't marry a second generation Egyptian convert, but can marry a third generation. Now, if the Torah calls them Mitzrim, and we're going to see that Rabbi Yehuda talked about these Mitzrim as if they're the Mitzrim of the Torah, then clearly, now in the time of the Tanaim, which is after the destruction of already the second temple, it's clearly the same Egyptians. So you can't suggest that. Now, how are we going to see this? So he was a Ger Mitzri, he was a convert, his friend Minyamin. And he said, Amal, Minyamin Ger Mitzri, my friend, Minyamin said, Ani Mitzri Rishon, I'm a first generation Egyptian. V'nasati Mitzri Rishona, right? And I converted, and I married another Egyptian convert. Asila b'ni Mitzri Shniya, our son, I'll marry him off to another second generation Mitzri convert, Kadeshi ben b'ni mutar lavo b'kal, and then my grandchildren will be able to marry in because they'll be third generations. So from here, it's clear that there are still Egyptians. So it can't possibly be the way we described that pasuk, like Rav Chinin Abar Papa said it, that they're going to be completely wiped out. So if you're going to say it, this is what you should say. This is really what Rav Chinin Abar Papa said. I'm Rav Chinin Abar Papa, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu nifra min hamelech ad sha'at shilucho. Only a king is going to be wiped out when completely. God waits to punish kings of non-Jewish countries, or non-Jewish nations, when they're ready to be entirely wiped out. And then it's time about a king. That's one explanation. So we went through those 3 psukim. We explained why we needed pasuk 3 and 2. And then we had to explain why do we need pasuk 1 as well. And we actually said that pasuk comes to teach us something else. And now in the end, we say it comes to teach you that kings of Gentiles will be, right, Gentile kings will be wiped out, where God punishes them only when he has enough there to completely wipe them out. But Ameimar had a different version of Rav Chinin Abar Papa, and this is going to kind of raise a bunch of questions that the Gemara is not going to even talk about, which don't get addressed, which kind of should have been raised. I don't know why they weren't. So now Ameimar says, I understood that Rav Chinin Abar Papa said his drasha on a different pasuk. On this pasuk. My dichtiv ki ani Hashem lo shaniti, va'atem b'nei Yaakov lo chilitem. Okay, there's a pasuk in Malachi, one of the Treasar, the 12 books. He says, I'm God, I do not do things a second time. And you, the Bnei Yaakov, I haven't wiped out entirely. Ani Hashem lo shaniti, which means lo iketi l'uma v'shaniti la. I never wiped out a nation twice. Why? Because when I do it one time, it's entirely complete. This goes by the first explanation of Rav Chinin Abar Papa, which is going to beg the question, because it doesn't ask then, first of all, it doesn't ask that what do you do with the pasuk v'sasa, which we're then stuck with if we go with this interpretation. And number two, they're not going to ask the question, but what do you mean? What about Minyamin? And what about the 3 kosot? And then what about Minyamin and all that? It doesn't go there. I don't know why. Tosfos suggests it doesn't go there because you're going to have a hard time translating this pasuk about a king, because this really seems to be talking about the Bnei Yaakov versus the Gentiles, which seems like a nation and not a king. Perhaps they didn't have an answer, and that's why they didn't ask the question. Anyway, let's go on. So now, how do we learn this? Because I wiped them entirely. That we just read. Okay, it's like God says, I will finish my arrows on you, the Jewish people, meaning my arrows might be finished, but the Jewish people are not completely destroyed. Okay, this is what we just said at the Seder, V'hisha amda lavotenu, right? This is what we always go through, trials and tribulations, and we're constantly having things come upon us, and yet we always survive. So this is, right, one of the messages of Pesach, very apropos, that God never wipes us entirely. Okay, we always continue on. Since we already, I'm a Rav Hamnuna, I skip it. Rav Hamnuna on this topic says, even on a regular person, if you have a really bad person, God will wait until he does enough bad things, like we said before about the Gentiles or maybe about the kings. The continuation is like b'malot sifko, when he completes a certain amount, kol yadam al tavuenu, all the hands shall come upon him. Some people say this is talking about olam haba. Basically, God waits with the Rishaim, let them do all their bad things in this world, and then in the next world they'll get their punishment. Since we're on Rav Chinna bar Papa, so we have another drasha that he says. Darash Rav Chinna bar Papa ma'ay tichsiv, and then we'll get back to our topic. Ranenu tzadikim b'Hashem. The tzadikim should say praises of God. La yisharim na'avat tehila. Okay, for the ones who are straight, the tehila will be beautiful, or exactly how to define it, but we're going to see the drasha defines it differently. Al tikrei nava tehila, ela nave tehila. Okay, that means that their nave, not nava like beautiful, their nave, their home, their abode, their palace will be tehila. Okay, will remain forever, almost they're going to say. Ze Moshe v'David, shalosh al tu sonehem b'maasehem. Okay, their enemies never. Right, one second. Ela nave tila. Right, Rashi says aliskein nave on the batim shabanu yahalaluhu. They will praise God on the basis of these palaces. That's maybe a better way to say it, the way Rashi does. Okay, will praise God because of their houses. What does that mean? Because God made sure that their enemies didn't destroy their house, their palaces. How do we see this? David dichtiv tavu ba'aretz sha'areha. In Echa, it says that the gates of Jerusalem that David had built, he built up, right, Ir David, what we call, city of David. He built up the city of David and the palace, and they basically sunk instead of being destroyed. Moshe da'amar mar, mishenivnei mikdash rishon nignaz o moed, chashav, chasav, brichav, amudav, adanat. All the parts of the tabernacle basically ended up being buried underneath the first temple when it was built. Where? There were these tunnels under the sanctuary, and under those tunnels, that's where the Mishkan was buried. So it ended up that no one was ever able to access them. Tunnel, that was just another drasha that he said about Jews and Gentiles, maybe in the context of what we were just saying. A little bit different and not the same thing. Usually they just like to quote things that are said by the same person that are somewhat related. Sometimes they're not even things that are related at all. Tanu Rabbanit. Sotah natzna eneha b'misha eno ra'ula. Another thing that we're going to see measure for measure. She tried to get something that wasn't hers, right? Some other man. She's married to someone else. So it was someone who wasn't ra'ula. She wasn't supposed to be with him. Masha biksha lo nitana. Her punishment was what she wanted, she didn't get. Umasha bigadana telo amimena. And what she had was taken away from her, meaning she can't now be with her new lover. That was taken away from her. And even what she had, right, she wasn't able to achieve what she wanted, attain what she wanted. And what she had, her previous husband, now she can't be with either. And that's what we always say, asur la boel, sleeps with, and asur la baal, to her husband. So now they say, and this is true in general, anybody who wants something that's not theirs, what they want, they will not get, and what they have in their hands is taken away. Now, starting on Amud Bet, we're going to see a bunch of examples. Okay, the snake in the story of Adam and Chava. So the snake He wanted Chava, a Sotah, according to the Midrash. What he wanted, he didn't get. What he had, it got taken away. What is what he had? So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ani Amarti. Now we're going to learn from the curse what he really should have had. So we're going to say whatever he was cursed by means he should have had the opposite. So Ani Amarti, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Ani Amarti Melech al Kol Be'emav V'Chayam. I was going to make you king of the jungle, king of all the animals. Now you're going to be hated and cursed by all the other animals. I said you were going to stand tall and proud. Your punishment, you're going to crawl on the ground. You're going to eat food that humans eat. Now you're going to eat dust. So again, taking all the curses and saying the opposite was really what was planned. And that's what the snake lost. Now, what was what he wanted and what he didn't get? I'll kill Adam and I'll marry Chava. Will cause the woman to hate you, right? There'll be hatred between you and this woman, from your children and her children, right? Or it comes from you. And such we saw. We're now going to have a long list. And the Gemara doesn't tell us where we see this, but we're going to go through based on some of the commentaries. Okay, what were all these people? They all wanted something that they didn't deserve. So what they wanted, they didn't achieve, and what they had was taken away. So let's go through one by one. Cain. Okay, Cain, there's different opinions here, but let's go with the one that he wanted to conquer the world. He wanted to inherit the world. And in the end, what happens? His children get wiped out in the Mabul, in the flood. Okay, next, Korach. Korach wanted the kiuna, he wanted the leadership. What happens? Not only did he not get it, but he gets swallowed up by the earth. Bil'am wanted the money from, he was doing this all for the money from the king of Midian, from Balak. And in the end, what happens? He ends up, what did I say? The king, right? Balak Melech Moab, the king of Moab. And in the end, he basically ends up on the way to get his money, he gets killed. Right. A lot of these things, by the way, are based in the Midrash. Doeg was jealous of David. And the Midrash also talks about it. He was jealous of David's Torah. In the end, he tattletales on David. Right. And in the end, according to the Midrash, he dies very young. I think it was at the age of 34. And I think Achitophel, the next one, dies at the age of 33. So they both got young. Achitophel also. Some people say he wanted the king. He was jealous of David. He wanted to be king. And he also dies young. Gehazi. He is jealous of, he wants Naaman's money. And not that he's jealous, he wanted Naaman's money, and in the end, he gets leprosy. Avshalom wanted the kingdom, he wanted to rebel against David, and in the end, he gets killed. Adoniah also wanted to rebel against the king and also, become king, and he also gets killed. Uziah was he was also the son of David, right? He also wanted he took the Pilegesh of, right? He wanted Avishag Shunamit, he wanted his Pilegesh. Uziah was the king of Yehuda, who wanted to be a Kohen, and he ends up getting leprosy. If you remember also, leprosy, they say, is like dying. So it's pretty bad. Haman, we all know, right? Haman wanted to hang Mordechai. He wanted to kill all the Jews. And in the end, obviously, he gets killed and the Jews win the war. Now they quote, now we quote the Mishna, which talks about, again, the midah keneged midah of the Sotah. We're going to have a little bit of a problem in the Psukim. It says that she started with her thighs because she sinned right between her thighs, and then therefore her thighs get punished first, and then her stomach. Well, where do we get this from? Ilema, if you want to say it, mishum dichtiv. It says when the Kohen makes her swear, and he says this text of what's going to happen to her, like a curse, and then she answers amen. So the first pasuk is Bamidbar Hey, pasuk 21. The Kohen makes her swear, b'shvuat ha'ala, and he says, God will make you la'ala l'shvuah as a curse, b'toch amech, in the midst of your nation, b'teit Hashem et yirechech nofelet be'et b'chnei tzava. Your legs are going to, your thighs are going to fall, and your stomach is going to explode. So now they say, okay, that makes sense. First the thigh, then the stomach. But what's the problem? V'haktiv. But it says in a different pasuk, when it describes what actually happens to her, it says, v'tzavta b'tnav nafla yirecha. Her stomach explodes, and then her thighs fall, which actually makes sense, because she drinks it, it goes into her body, first it gets to her stomach. So Amar Abai, so how does this, it doesn't make any sense, and why are the psukim reversed? So Amar Abaye, first, when he curses her, which in and of itself is a punishment, he says first the thigh and then the stomach, because he wants to tell her that's how you sinned, that's how you're getting punished. But Maya kibatke, when the water goes through, ki or chayubatke, obviously it's going to go first to the stomach, like I said before. Betem bereisha, v'hadar yarech, first to the stomach and then to the thigh. So, and then they say, wait a minute. But if that's what you want to say, so basically when he curses her, it's going to be first the yarech, then the stomach. Then when it actually happens, it's the stomach, then the thigh. But wait a minute, there's a third pasuk that we didn't quote yet. Okay, what's that pasuk? It says, Biklala nami haktiv, but also by the curse it says, Latzbot betev and lampil yerech. In the pasuk right after the one where he says first thigh, then stomach, then it says, and then and he just continues to describe to her, the waters are going to go in, but they're going to go into your insides, your intestines, litzbot bet, and they'll make your stomach explode, and then the woman says, amen, amen. So the curse starts off doing thigh, stomach, and then continues with stomach, thigh. It's even more confusing. So what do they say? No, it's not confusing at all. Okay, let's start from the beginning. She sinned first with her thigh. So when he curses her, he says first the thigh. But if he left it at that and didn't describe that when the water goes in, though, it's going to hit your stomach first, then she would say, when it actually hits her stomach first, she'd say, hey, you were wrong. Look, this isn't from God. This is something else going on. To make sure she doesn't say that, he tells her, oh, but by the way, when it happens, it's going to go in this order. So you're deserving of that in that order, and that's why I'm cursing you in that way. But really, when it happens, it's going to be the reverse order. Okay. New Mishna. Now we're going to see other people who got measure for measure. Shimshon he followed his eyes, and therefore the plishtim knocked out his eyes. Okay, at the end of his life, right? The plishtim first make him blind. Avshalom nitga'eh, this is right after they cut off his hair. Okay, we're going to read the whole story inside in a few minutes. Avshalom nitga'eh, he was very proud of his hair. He was a nazir and all that. He was then hung by his hair. Next. Okay, now we're going to see with Avshalom all sorts of other things, because his hair, what happens is with him, his hair gets stuck on the tree and then he gets hung in that way. But in addition to that, he had other things happen to him as well when he dies. There's a whole description we'll see right now. He slept with 10 pilakshim of his concubines of his father to show I'm king. Therefore, 10 spears were stabbed into him. Okay, 10 people came and they stabbed. He stole 3 things. What did he steal? Lev Aviv, the heart of his father, Lev Beitin, the heart of the court, and Lev Yisrael, the heart of the Jews. How did he do that? The pasuk describes him that he would stand in line while people were waiting for judgment, and he would basically convince them that David was not going to listen to them, and they should come to his court instead. And with that, he was basically stealing David's heart, stealing the court's heart, and stealing the people's heart, because he was convincing them that he was better to go to than them. That was how he got people onto his side. Therefore, 3 other shvatim, maybe his spears. There's debate what exactly lunbiot are, and maybe they're javelins, and shlosha shvatim is spears. In any case, 3 different instruments were stabbed into him. Okay, so we end up, he's killed in 3 different manners, and that's based on 3 sins he did. Next, so we showed the Sotah and Shimshon and Avshalom that all get midah keneged midah in the Mishna. Right? In the Gemara, we had some other explanations before. Now we're going to see it's also when it comes to good, you get measure for measure. Miriam, she waited for Moshe for 1 hour, okay, whatever that means. Right? We don't know how long she waited, but she waited a period of time. But right? She stood there in the bushes while baby Moshe went down the Nile. Therefore, the Jews waited for her for 7 days when she had leprosy. They waited for her. Yosef he buried his father. What was his reward? Well, since he was the greatest of all his brothers, how do we know that he took the body and that he was the greatest? Because it says, Okay, he went to take care of it, and it says Vayalimo gam rechev gam parashim, and he had a whole all these chariots going with it. Milanu gadol Yosef shalom nitasek bo ela Moshe. So who's greater than Yosef, who dealt with his body? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe zacha ba'atzmot Yosef. Right, we saw Moshe took the bones of Yosef. This came up in Nazir not too long ago. Ve'em b'Yisrael gadol mimenu. Now, who's greater than Moshe to be able to take care of Moshe, the burial of Moshe? God, obviously. Shene'amar b'yikach. Migadol mi Moshe shalom nitasek bo ela hamakom. Right, so who's greater? Sorry, I skipped. Moshe, let's go back. Moshe zacha ba'atzmot Yosef ve'em Yisrael gadol mimenu. There was no one greater than Moshe. So therefore, that was number one, the reward that Yosef got. How do we know? Shene'amar b'yikach Moshe tatmot Yosef imo. He took the bones with him. Mi gadol mi Moshe shalom nitasek bo ela hamakom. And who is greater than Moshe? That the most important person to deal with his death was God. Shene'amar v'yikbor oto b'gai. Said God buried him in the valley. Lo Moshe bilvad amru el al kol hatzadikim. It's not just true for Moshe Rabbeinu. It's true for any righteous person. Shene'amar v'alach lefanecha tzidkecha kavod Hashem yasvecha. If your righteousness precedes you, meaning you acted with righteousness, then the glory of God will collect you when it's your time to go. Okay, so we saw in this Mishna, Shimshon and Avshalom, midah keneged midah, measure for the punishment. We saw from Miriam, Yosef, and Moshe, midah keneged midah, also for rewards. Now, from here till the end of today's stop and further into tomorrow, we're going to go into Shimshon and all sorts of things about the parsha of Shimshon. So first we say, Tanu Rabbanan, we're going to see a few things that he got midah keneged midah in punishment. Shimshon be'enav marad shneimah. Where did it say that he sinned with his eyes? First thing we see, he starts to do when he gets older. Vayom Shimshon el aviv ota kach li ki hi hashra be'enai. He sees that he goes to Timnah, he sees this woman, and he says, this woman looks good to me, and he starts kind of befriending the Plishtim and hanging out with Plishti women, which is not a good thing. So since he sinned with his eyes, what his eyes saw, because he saw that she was good by his eyes, so he gets punished. To which the Gemara says, right, how do we know that? They took out his eyes, as we saw in the Mishna, right, and they pulled out his eyes. Right, they blinded him. Is this really true? But wait a minute. His mother and father didn't realize that this whole thing was God. God's hand was in Shimshon's actions. When he went to this woman, his whole plot, we'll talk about this further, he basically wanted to infiltrate into the Plishtim society, have them believe that he was an outcast from the Jews, because he definitely seemed like the atypical Jew. And with that, he was able to actually get into their midst and destroy them and save the Jewish people. So this was all a hand of God. So how could you say this was a bad thing he did? To which they say, and this is going to be one of the things we're going to struggle with throughout the rest of today's stop, is this kind of seesaw between Shimshon was a pretty bad guy, and we see that in all sorts of ways. On the other hand, he saved the Jewish people, and he was God's messenger. So how do we reconcile this? And the truth is, we're not going to really have an answer. We're going to have this seesaw back and forth of good comments about him. We're going to even call him a tzaddik at some point. And that's not a word you generally think of when you think of Shimshon. On the other hand, he was a great leader, right? So he has this issue where he was also sleeping with prostitutes, and he was with Plishti women. On the other hand, he was able to save the Jewish people. So now they say, Ki azal mia. So what was wrong with it? If it was God's hand, Ki azal mia batar yashrute. It's true it was God's hand, but in the end, he was attracted to her with his eyes. And then he kind of had the wrong intents while he did it. The wrong intentions while he was doing it, or kind of, maybe he went at first with the right intentions and then kind of went off the path and, just became very attracted to her. Tanya, Rebbe Omer, Tchilat Kilkulo Ba'aza. Okay, Rebbe has a different, he doesn't think, this pasuk we quoted, first of all, was Perek Yud Dalet, chapter 14. Rebbe says, jump ahead to chapter 16. That's when things start going bad. So he says, Tchilat Kilkulo Ba'aza, again, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. He started going bad in Aza, Lefikach Laka Ba'aza. Therefore, he was ruined in Aza. Okay, it says in the last pasuk there, they took him, they blinded him, Yaridu Oto Azata, they took him down to Aza, and that's when they tied him up, right? And then basically, that's the end of his, right, when they start, the beginning of his demise. So now they say, why is that? Because the beginning of that chapter, it says, he goes to Aza and he finds this prostitute. So in the end, when he gets killed, it's in Aza. But wasn't the beginning, not in the beginning of chapter 16, but the beginning of chapter 14. Wasn't that when he goes to Timnah and he starts with the Plishtim women? So they say no. Sounds like the Timnah woman was really God's hand, maybe, as we said before. But he started going bad when he started going with this prostitute. Now we're going to get to the psukim about Delilah. So after he's with this Zonah in the beginning of chapter 16, then he ends up finding this woman he loves. So Tanya, Rabbi Yomi, again Rabbi, says, if she wouldn't have been called Delilah in the pasuk, we would have said, would have been an appropriate name. Why? Delilah comes from the lashon of Dildila. She weakened. Dildila et kocho, she weakened his spirit. Dildila is strength, Dildila libo, she weakened his heart. And Dildila masav, she weakened his actions. Okay? This sounds similar to Avshalom did the three things, right? Stole the heart of the nation, stole the heart of the court, and stole the heart of David. Here also, there's three things she did. Dildila et kocho dichti vayasar kocho me'ala. And so now we're going to read these psukim. Maybe I'll read them first all inside, and then we'll translate them, and then we'll see how the Gemara deals with them. So first we start with this pasuk. She was bothering him with her words. All the days. And she basically does something to him. Okay, she pushes him into a corner. We don't know yet what she does. We'll see what the Midrash says about it in our Gemara. And he felt like he was about to die. So after she'd been bothering him for all this time and then does some action that really pushes him over the edge, he then tells her everything in his heart. She says, listen, I never cut my hair because I'm a Nazir of God from when I was born. Im gulachti, right, from my mother's, from the womb. Im gulachti b'sar mimenu kochi, if I get shaved, someone shaves my hair off, I'll be sick, I'll be weakened like anybody else. But Tera Delilah, right, I'll be weakened, not as much as sick, but I'll be weakened. But Tera Delilah, ki gila koli, both she understood that he spoke, that he really gave away his big secret. But Tishlach batikha l'sarnei plishtim, she went to the plishtim officers, le'mor alu hapam, come now, ki gila li et koli, because he told me everything in his heart. Va'alu elah sarnei plishtim, they went, va'alu akesef biyadam, they came with the money in their hands. But Yashneu al birka, she gets him to fall asleep on her legs. Vatikala ish, she calls the man, Vatikalach Sheva Machlapot Rosho, he cuts all of his hair off. Vatachel Anoto Vayasar Kocho Me'alav. Then he starts to suffer, right, and all of his strength leaves him. Then the Plishtim, Vatomer Plishtim Alecha Shimshon, the Plishtim, right, they say Plishtim are on you, Shimshon, she tells him. Vayikatz Mishnato, right, she basically says, Plishtim are here. He wakes up. Vayomer, take a pam b'pam be'inael, I'm going to go out and fight against them, like always. He didn't realize that his hair wasn't there and that God was no longer with him. Then the Plishtim grab him, they blind him, they take him to Aza and they tie him up and chain him up. Okay, that's the story. Right? I didn't read the whole end of it, but many of you know it anyway. That's the important part for right now. So now we're going to see a bunch of questions. So first we're going to see what she does. So she'll dildilad kocho, because it says he no longer had his strength, right? Vayasar kocho me'alav. He no longer has his strength. It's by cutting his hair. Right? She weakened his heart because she took out his biggest secret. And he no longer, she weakened his actions because God was no longer with him. He didn't know that God had left him. So now they want to know, how did she know that he was telling the truth? So two possibilities. Everybody knows when someone's telling the truth. You could tell. Here they call him a tzaddik. She knew that he was a tzaddik and he would never what? He would never use God's name in vain. So since he said, I'm a Nazir of God, he clearly is telling the truth again. This is one that shows him as a real tzaddik. We never use God's name in vain. Not exactly the image you have of Shimshon. What is this? What did she do? What was this one action that pushed him over the edge? While they were having relations, before he finished, she basically quickly came out, and that caused him to suffer. And that's what caused him to feel like he was about to die, and he gave away his secret because he didn't want her to do it again or something like that. Now we're jumping all the way back to the psukim when his mother gets commanded when he's still in the womb. When he says you're gonna get pregnant and start already not drinking any, right? Not eating. Don't drink water, or wine or beer. And don't eat anything impure. What does he mean by don't eat anything impure? This is what the angel tells her. V'tu, and furthermore, what she ate non-kosher food, usually tamei is a non-kosher food. What she ate non-kosher food before? What he meant is tamei is impure things for a nazir to eat. Okay, it's not exactly a term we generally use, but that must be what it meant. Now we're back to Shimshon. So in one of the stories of Shimshon is he takes the jawbone of a donkey and he kills 1,000 plishtim with it. And then he's very thirsty. And God makes this miracle happen where basically there's this hole like a reed and basically, or from the cheekbone, I'm not sure how it works, but basically water came out of it. So there's different explanations exactly what this is, and how this worked. Anyway, we'll stick with that. Because he wanted something impure, like these women he wanted, therefore he ended up with this. Just want to see one thing. They say it's where the machtesh, Rashi says, is where the tooth is, and it came out of there, something from the jawbone of the donkey, something like that. So he wanted this non-Jewish woman, and therefore he was punished through some impure item, this jawbone from a donkey. That's how the miracle happened, right? It's nice the miracle happens from God, but when it happens in an impure way, like from an impure animal, not exactly the best way possible. This is now earlier. This is in chapter 13. This is even before. These are near the Beit Shemesh area. So Ruach Hashem starts coming to him. We're going to darshan these words. First thing they say is Amar Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Chanina Chaltan nevuato shel Yaakov Avinu. Batach Ruach Hashem means the prophecy came true of Yaakov. What was the prophecy? Dechtiv Yehi Dan Nachash alei derech. From Dan is going to come a snake. Okay, Shimshon was like a snake. He very surreptitiously ended up saving the Jewish people, but in a very kind of secretive manner, kind of snake-like manner, as we said before, kind of infiltrated into the Plishtim people. Lefa'amo, and he's from Shevet Dan, so there's Moshe's prophet, Yaakov's prophecy coming true. Lefa'amo b'machaneh Dan. What is this word lefa'amo? So it was the Ruach Hashem. He was getting this prophecy lefa'amo. What is lefa'amo? Again, a very positive drasha. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Tibei Rabbi Ami. Malamed shayta shchina mekashkeshet panav kizov. It would ring before him like a bell, like trying to inspire him. How do we know it's like a bell? Because it says lefa'amo b'machaneh dan uchtifatam pa'amon v'rimon. They compare him even to the Kohen Gadol on his me'il, on the cloak of the Kohen Gadol, were these pa'amonim at the bottom, a pa'amon rimon, and he would ring as he would go. It would always be waking him up and kind of alerting him. Also, Shimshon was getting these alerting all the time, these prophecies. Why specifically are they telling us the place? Okay, maybe we want to know where it is, but why? So he says these were these two big mountains. He lifted them up and kind of pushed them up against each other. He was showing his strength, and that was building his reputation, so that the Plishtim eventually got very scared of him. Last drasha for today. Amar Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina. Why does it say Hu Yachel Oshiat Yisrael? You could have just said Hu Moshiach Yisrael. So they say Yachel Hu Chal Shvuato Shel Avimelech. What happened? Avram made a pact with Avimelech. Now Plishtim were from Avimelech. So what happened? How could Shimshon fight against the Plishtim? They had a pact. Well, they destroyed the pact first. That's what happened. That was part of the plan. If you lie to me, right, then we won't have this pact anymore. And once the Plishtim started being doing bad things to the Jewish people and making them suffer, that was a breaking of the pact, and therefore Shimshon was allowed to fight up against them. Okay, that's it for right now. We'll continue with more drashot of Shimshon further on. Again, what did we do today? We started with this braita, with the Sotah and the midah keneged midah, those three psukim. We dealt with a whole long list of Sotah, measure for measure. Then we dealt with those 3 psukim, and then we dealt with this, what's this Besas Apasuk really coming to do? We had some different versions of Rav Hanina Bar Papa and some other drasha that he said. Then we went into this whole list of people like the Sotah who wanted something that wasn't theirs and basically lost. Not only did they not get what they wanted, but they also got other things taken away. Then the Mishna went back and gave other examples, Shimshon and Avshalom, and also examples of measure for measure in a positive way, Miriam, Yosef, and Moshe. And then we started going off on drashot about Shimshon, which, as we saw, zigzag between, or seesawed between, good things about Shimshon and problematic things about Shimshon's behavior, showing kind of the 2 sides of Shimshon. That will finish for today.